I would like to call to order this meeting of the Town of St. Andrews Planning Advisory Committee. We are meeting on special business tonight here in the W.C. O'Neill Arena Dining Room. If I'm looking around the table to record attendance, committee members are here at the table. Mr. Ingalls is online. Thanks and welcome. We have our applicants with us, our planner, and Mr. Nopper from the town, so welcome everyone. Just before we get on with our agenda, just to remind everyone, this is a continuation of our meeting from January 29th. I think that we all conducted ourselves in a professional and respectful manner, and I'd like to sort of maintain that tone and tenor for tonight's meeting as we work through the rest of this application. So back to the committee, we have our agenda in front of us. Would someone like to make a motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Any seconder for the motion? Thanks, Mr. Tanner. Excellent. So there being no discussion, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Mr. Ingalls, thank you very much. None opposed. Excellent. We'll move forward. As we get started, pardon?
I'm just wondering if there's any way to increase the volume?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, and I'm 2 doors down.
Oh, wow, okay. Hello? Is that better?
A little bit.
A little bit? I'll try and aim this way. How does that sound? Okay. As we get started, we recognize that we are on the unceded traditional territory of the Bezgotomogati people, and we welcome you tonight to our meeting. We have also received our minutes from our meeting on January 29th. They were quite detailed. Would anyone care to make a motion on the adoption of those minutes? Thank you, Councillor Harland. A seconder on the minutes? Mr. Kerr, thank you very much. Any comments, questions on the minutes? If not, I will call the question. All those in favor of adopting the minutes from January 29th, please signify by saying aye. 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 None opposed. Mr. Ingalls, thank you. Therefore, those minutes have been adopted. I appreciate that. So moving on, tonight we're looking, is there anyone at the table with the declaration of conflict of interest on this file? Mr. Ingalls, nobody? Excellent. All right. Our one and only agenda item tonight is to conclude our meeting from January 29th. As I said, St. Mary's First Nations application for a variance for a lobster holding facility. This is item number PAC 240101. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Henderson for some updated information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just going to wait. Oh, I think we got the presentation up here. And just for everybody's awareness, I think for tonight, given we've already covered a lot of this ground, what I'll do is just do a very quick summary of the report on the information that's already been presented, but then I'll focus on the portion of the report which was added as an addendum based on that new information supplied by DTI. There we go. All right, so this is an application for a similar to or compatible use. So they're requesting that a lobster holding facility be considered similar to or compatible with a light industrial use, which is a use permitted in the rural zone. So basically, this was an application that was considered by PAC in October 2022. That decision was made in the affirmative with terms and conditions. It was appealed. That appeal was decided by the board with a requirement that it be reconsidered by the PAC, now the PAC because of the changes in boundary. The directions that the board gave were to redo the notice with accurate information, as well as take considerations of several things that were brought to the attention of planning staff and the applicant to address. So that was done, and this is now being reconsidered. So I'll just kind of flip through some of these things. So that's the main details. The main details of the request remain the same as 2022. The owner of the subject lot has proposed developing a 7,000 square foot cold water live lobster holding facility consisting of 2 holding tanks with a combined capacity of 80,000 pounds of lobster. No on-site processing would occur, and the holding tanks would discharge into Chamcook Harbor. So yeah, we're looking at the same thing that was requested in October 2022. Again, a number of these things have been covered, so I'll just pass over most of them related to the environmental controls for these types of facilities. So they're quite normal facilities that exist all along the coast. This is some information about their proposed season. So they tend to operate in the lobster season, and the traffic was intended to consist of 4 to 6 cube vans and 3 to 4 trucks daily with a maximum of 8 employees on site. And I believe the applicant had some information to share about that. The odor and the waste was to be dealt with through sealed drums that would be stored and taken to a landfill. There was a question about this with some of the commentary on the new notice. The assessment of the lot is residential, it's an existing vacant shorefront lot, but assessment and taxation isn't the same as land use designation, so that's just simply what an assessor would have looked at it as. So some of the properties around it are assessed as residential as well. But the point here in the report was to note that the property to the south, Chamcook Point, had been assessed as industrial land, and that was due to the historical presence of the cannery, which had been discussed previously. We talk about the rural plan and its objectives, and at high level they encourage commercial sea harvesting and recreational boating activities in Chamcook Harbor. And we talked about the rural zone. So the rural zone is not a residential zone. It's a zone for general rural development. So it includes a number of uses. It's a mixed-use zone. So you can do residential, and this area has become residential largely. But you can also do non-polluting light industrial uses as well as other types of uses, which we discussed later in this report. The light industrial use definition is the closest analog to what is being proposed. And what is being proposed doesn't quite fit in that definition, but that's why you can do a similar to or compatible with variance request. If the plan doesn't conceive of every possible use, but you have a close analog to something that's allowed, someone is allowed to apply to a committee, as such as PAC, to make a determination whether or not it is similar to or compatible with another use in the zone. So that's really all that's being discussed tonight. Is it something that's similar to or compatible with another use that's allowed? Because if you can do that other use, it would be the idea that it would be the same level of impact, that you're not compromising the intent of the permitted uses in the zone. Now, the rural plan did not contain definitions or conceive of fishery uses occurring inside of buildings. Some of these things have become, in more modern iteration of the fishery, this has been happening more and more, where you have fishery uses occurring inside buildings. But fishery uses outdoors in Chamcook Harbor were envisioned by the rural plan. So everyone received the notice of the last meeting within 1,000 meter radius of the subject lot. And more notice time was given per the appeal board's instructions. At that time, when we did the first notice, there was a number of objections from surrounding neighbors. So we heard concerns around loss of residential character, heavy industrial intrusion, traffic safety, poor road conditions, and concerns about noise, odor, enforcement, and pollution. And now, because there's been a second notice period because the meeting was postponed and we received new information after the meeting, which I'll talk about, there was an opportunity to comment on that new information, so I'll go to that next. We did consult with experts at DELG, the Department of Environment and Local Government, regarding the application and potential for pollution, and their recommendations for environmental conditions. We did originally consult DTI, and we got some commentary back from a technician, not their superintendent. But we did get commentary from the superintendent the day after the meeting. So on January 29th, the superintendent of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure provided new information to staff. So he said, I have a couple concerns with this development. First, the road is very narrow, which will pose an issue with trucks entering and leaving the facility. Trucks will most likely take up both lanes of traffic. According to the site plan, the building does not meet DTI setback standards. It should be noted that the road is a 43,500 kilogram road, and depending on the load size, possible road distress will occur. The present condition of the road would not support heavy trucking. So what we did with that information was talk to the applicant about their site plan. So the site plan showed a building that was 5 meters setback from the property line, and what would be compliant would be 7.5 meters. So they adjusted that site plan. Additionally, the applicant responded to this information by saying they would adhere to the weight restrictions that are imposed on St. Andrews North Road by not allowing any vehicles with a weight above 43,500 kilograms. And we talked about that second notice that was sent out with the same radius and an explanation of this new information to residents. All right, so that's looking at their original site plan with the 5 meter setback from the road, and this is what it looks like when it's adjusted. So I'm just going to skip through some of this. It's just showing the road is considered, or it's designated as local maintained, and they consider it in good condition on the DTI map book. It's just the aerial photos of the site and the Chamcook Harbor. So this was the applicant's buffer plan. So how they intended to follow the rural plan's requirement to have a buffer to mitigate noises, lights, and to reduce the aesthetic impact of the development, which is a requirement of the rural plan under section 313. The applicant proposed to have a buffer with a residential style concrete fence, so that's what they proposed here with that image. And they also provided commentary based on the appeal board's directions to respond to some of the original concerns from October 2022. So those were these, and we covered this in the report, and you can see it in the variance application. That's just a concept, the original concept for the facility, the exterior. And that's a proposed layout of the interior with the tanks. All right, so we talked about the objectives of the Chamcook Rural Plan, and I don't need to go through each one in detail, but basically to note here, that fishing and non-polluting light industrial uses are encouraged, as well as preserving rural character, lifestyles, and aesthetic beauty. So essentially there's a balance here that needs to be struck. So development can be encouraged, but only where conditions are established to ensure that the development does not undermine the environment, water quality of Chamcook Harbor, and the area's rural character, lifestyle, or aesthetics. Preserving character, lifestyle, and aesthetics is necessarily discretionary. There's no objective standard of this, but that's the role of PAC to decide, does this meet that? Environment and water quality are protected through accepted pollution control standards. So there's something objectively we can point to. You have to meet an EIA, you have to get a license of occupancy for the saltwater discharge pipe, and these have measurable determinative outcomes for what is acceptable. We talked about the policies of the rural plan. So there's both protecting of protecting residential areas from intrusions of incompatible uses, as well as promoting light industrial uses at the same time. So again, these things can be considered something that needs to be balanced. When you look at a policy, it's important to note that it's not about assessing whether or not a development meets that policy in particular. The policy is what's used to frame the rest of the rural plan. So it's worth keeping in mind that when the drafters crafted the rural plan, they considered both uses in the same zone as being permitted and part of the plan. We talked about the definition of light industrial use. I'm not going to read that verbatim, but you've seen that in the report as well. Statements of public interest. This is a new thing since the October 2022 decision by the PAC to approve it. But maybe I'll read this one, just given the newness of it. With respect to agriculture, fisheries, and aquaculture, it is a public interest and public priority to promote the agriculture, fishery, and aquaculture sectors and the production of food in the province. The following policies are established with respect to agriculture, fisheries, and aquaculture. Now, this is just for note, this is a provincial regulation that supersedes the rural plan. So all planning in the province has to adhere to these policies. So a policy is to identify current and future areas for fishery use and aquaculture use and prioritize them for those uses and other compatible uses. And C, consider setbacks, including reciprocal setbacks, if appropriate, between areas with an agriculture use, fishery use, or an aquaculture use, and areas used for incompatible purposes. So what does this mean? As I said, this is important because it prevails over the Chamcook area rural plan regulation. And all planning decisions are meant to conform with these policies. So this is a regulation that was adopted by Cabinet. This regulation's intent is to ensure that fishery uses have access to coastal areas. Now, PAC has to consider the long-term impacts of all development types in coastal areas and balance the interests of year-round and seasonal residents with industry opportunities. And PAC may consider the development subject to standards or conditions on its approval to help avoid, minimize, or mitigate potential land use conflicts. And so this is an important line here, but I'm not going to go through detail in the discussion. We've already covered this ground, but PAC's mandate right now is to revisit the decision made by the PAC in October 2022. So it may affirm, revoke, or vary the original decision of PAC. So if PAC is to make a motion tonight, one of the things I just want to draw the committee's attention to is that the language should be to affirm, revoke, or vary that original decision. So please be advised that it is important to include in your motion if you were to make one. So I talked about the guidelines for similar to or compatible with uses, and we already talked about what does this type of application even mean? Are you deciding whether this is the appropriate zone for the area? No. You're deciding whether or not the use can be considered similar to compatible with another use in that zone that already exists. So that's really where the discussion needs to lie. Talked about agriculture uses being permitted and their potential for impact, and talked about how it's not just a single-use residential zone. So that's important to keep in mind. We also talked about the sort of the how it is kind of close to the light industrial category, but not quite, and how this required this kind of decision tonight because it doesn't fit exactly with the light industrial category. Now, we also talked about how heavy industrial uses are clearly excluded from this zone. So things that commonly result in odors, fumes, noise, cinder, vibrations, heat, glare, or electrical interference, rural plan prohibits those in this zone. Trucking is incidental to light industrial uses such as warehouses, and distribution of products using trucks with internal combustion engines is common to this type of use. So that would have been envisioned by the rural plan because you couldn't do light industrial without it. we talked about the idea that if this was a different type of light industrial use application, I would be forced to give the development permit. I'd have to if it was clearly within that category. So if it complied with Section 313, they would get a permit, and there wouldn't be a meeting tonight or a notice to neighbors or anything like that. It would just be allowed. So this is just the way the plan was written at the time it was approved. So this is a section of the Act which you would be making a decision under tonight, PAC. Section 55(1) of the Community Planning Act. And here's my recommendation to the PAC of the Town of St. Andrews, is that the PAC of the Town of St. Andrews approve the variance by considering the Lobster holding facility as proposed by St. Mary's First Nation on the subject lot to be similar to or compatible with a light industrial use, a permitted use in the rural zone, and by varying the October 2022 PAC decision by subjecting it to the following terms and conditions. 1, that a copy of the environmental impact assessment approval or EI exemption from the Department of Environment and Local Government for the proposed volume of saltwater consumption shall be provided to the development officer prior to a building permit issuance. 2, that a copy of the license of occupation from the Department of Natural Resources and Energy Development for the saltwater discharge pipe shall be provided to the development officer prior to the building permit issuance. 3, that the arrangement of buildings, structures, mechanical systems, parking, and loading areas be developed in general conformity with the information submitted with the application. 4, that prior to the final inspection by the building inspector, a 5 to 8.5 meter wide treed buffer and a residential style 3 meter tall concrete wall with a sound transmission class rating of 37 or greater be installed and completed according to the buffer design and site plan submitted with the variance application. 5, that other than an access points or buffers referred to in the previous condition, a 5 meter naturally vegetated buffer is developed along the property lines and along the top of the bank, and that this buffer area is preserved for the planting, growth, and maintenance of trees. 6, that prior to the final building inspection, the facility's exterior mechanical equipment be enclosed in solid structures with an STC of 55 or greater, with an access doors with an STC sound transmission class of 37 or greater to the satisfaction of the building inspector. 7, that no heavy industrial uses other than industrial processing of fish, aquaculture, or slaughter of live species may occur on the subject lot without a zoning bylaw amendment approved by the Council of the Town of St. Andrews. 8, that prior to the final building inspection, the facility's exterior siding be clad with either traditional building materials such as cedar shakes, wooden facsimiles, masonry, or be clad with metal material painted with a bright primary color. 9, that prior to the final building inspection, any exterior lighting is shielded and directed downward and not directed at any neighboring property or into Chamcook Harbor to the satisfaction of the development officer. 10, that all dead animal waste shall be stored in sealed, odor-proof containers inside the facility or in a refrigerated trailer on site before being disposed at the regional landfill. And 11, that no loading or offloading of lobsters, equipment, or other products shall occur between the hours of 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that all other requirements of the Chamcook Area Rural Plan and all environmental, provincial, and federal acts or regulations are complied with. And that concludes my report, or presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Mr.? Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I have a couple of questions. So in the area, is L&B industry, or is that considered light industrial? Is that zoned as light industrial?
So you're referring to the vacant property to the south?
The Chamcook Point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this isn't actually used for anything other than a kind of staging area for outdoor fishery activities.
Right.
So you sometimes have boats pulled up in there and
Right.
People assembling nets and so on. Clammers are parking there and that kind of activity. It's a vacant lot. So under zoning, we would just be looking at we'd be looking at the use of land in a sense that if we were to be proving a development there,
Okay.
does it comply with zoning? So there wouldn't be anything we're approving there. There's no building permits. There would be no development permits that would need to be taken out for that type of activity. And that activity has been occurring for some time, I think, since those buildings were demolished decades ago.
So in the 1 kilometer radius, polling radius, there is no other example of light industrial?
There are some light industrial, but I do not recall if it's within the 1,000-meter radius.
Okay. And so if this variance application were approved, then this would become the standard by which any other applications would be compared to. Is that correct?
No, because what it is, the rural plan is written, and if you comply with what the rural plan allows, then you can obtain a permit. If it's outside of the rural plan, but it's close to something that's permitted, close enough that it doesn't really warrant rezoning, then the PAC would decide the next case. And there's no such kind of precedent decisions in law when it comes to these things. Each one is discretionary.
Okay.
So you'd have to look at the merits each and every time.
Okay, great. And I have one more question.
Absolutely.
So you showed a picture in the applicant's package about a residential style fence to be used as a part of the buffer. That's a 10-foot tall concrete fence, is that correct?
Yes.
And are you aware in all of the town of St. Andrews of any other examples of 10 feet high concrete fences?
No, that kind of fence would not be permitted in the town site of St. Andrews, which has a different bylaw regulating fences in residential areas specifically. In commercial areas, you could do, of the town site of St. Andrews, you could do taller fences, which you would have in cases where there's maybe there's a institutional kind of use that requires a pretty substantial fence. But I think in the terms of the language, I just wanted to connect it back to the applicant's proposal. So when they mean residential style there, I think it's just the product type, because if you went on the website that they linked to where they intended to do this type of wall, that's just what it was called. It's a kind of a wall that you would see sometimes in a new subdivision that might be next to a high traffic corridor. So
Right.
if you were trying to mitigate noises from the road
Right.
to a residential subdivision, you kind of would see that. But we don't really have that kind of, you don't see that evidenced in subdivisions around here so much.
Right. Great, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Ingalls, anything from you?
Yes, I just have a quick question for you, Alex. You said earlier that our discussion and our decision is discretionary, correct?
No, yeah, that's correct.
Now, you just said that your decision to identify this as light industrial is discretionary as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same path, that this is really discussion that, because there's no hard fast rule that this can apply to, that it is discretionary, that the report that you've given us is your best shot at a discretionary sort of slot for putting this into light industrial use.
That would be correct.
Okay, thanks, that's all.
Thanks, Mr. Ingles. Anyone else at the table?
I have a couple questions.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
For Alex. So Alex, when we talk about an STC rating of 35 and 55, can you put that in common sense text, like loudness and so forth?
So this is basically what I looked at with a different file of a similar lobster holding facility elsewhere in the region. And when we are looking at different opportunities for mitigating noises, the STC is the accepted code sort of standard for mitigating noises. So our building inspectors are qualified to assess that, and this would be this is what was recommended to me through the building inspector, because they see different types of uses and different types of occupancies in the same building have to have STC sound transmission class ratings between them. So let's say it's a mixed-use building and you have a shop on the ground floor and apartments above. Well, there needs to be sound transmission. Like, you don't want to have an apartment above a shop and hear all the conversations down below. So they have certain STC ratings that would eliminate such noises, or also from like common stairwells. So this is in the National Building Code. So I can't say, for example, what STC 55 does, but this is what I got as a recommendation to me to use.
So my second question oriented to the 37 and 35, what type of noise level do you think that we would be listening to 24 hours a day at say 100 feet or say 50 feet? Do you think that the fence at an STC of 35 and then the building class, what's the tolerable level? Would it be a snow blower? Would it be a mower? Would it be a hairdryer? Would it be, what are we listening to 24 hours a day?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on this area, so I was relying on the advice of building officials who use this. But the intent, at least, was to make those noises mitigated as much as reasonably possible. I don't know if that would eliminate it completely, but the point here is to, with the buffers, not necessarily that you can eliminate it entirely, but that you can restrict it and limit it, and so that it's definitely tolerable and not a nuisance. So the idea is to eliminate nuisance.
Okay. I have a second question. So in our packages that we received this time, we have a Service New Brunswick land assessment that says the property tax name, and I just want some clarification on this, is designed as residential waterfront land. So can you clarify, because in St. Andrews we have commercial, we have institutional, we have recreational, we have residential, and how does this apply to the rural areas outside of St. Andrews, which soon, again, we'll have probably new classifications down the road, but at this present time we have to deal with what we have.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I kind of touched on it because I was aware that there were some concerns about the assessment and how it was assessed as residential. So we see this all the time where, I guess you would say tax assessors, they look at property and they see it as what's its potential like highest and best use, and they use real estate categories for this. So tax assessment has all kinds of categories that really don't correspond to zoning, but they're looking at it as it is to them. So we might have an area that, let's say, council is zoned for a future business park, right? And currently the uses of the land are woodland, maybe a house, maybe another institutional use, but council wants to see it all develop as a business park in the future. Well, the zone might be for business park development, but the assessments are what they're using the property for today, to the best of that assessor's ability to categorize it. And they have hundreds of categories that they apply when they're looking at land. So they might have looked at this, and I don't really want to speculate, but I suspect it might have had something to do with, you know, their surrounding residential uses. It might become that too in the future. And whereas the one to the south on the point, there was some view that it looked like it had industrial remnants on there, or they had seen that had been owned by a company with the industrial name, then maybe that was also why they categorized it. I cannot really say, but that would just be my best guess.
So the property to the south, which is Mike LeBlanc's, the big piece of land, is that also residential, or is that zone commercial for tax purposes? I'm just trying to get a feeling here.
So for tax purposes, they don't use zoning. They might look at it as part of their analysis, but it's not how, like I said, we commonly see this where a property might be zoned for commercial, but someone just has a house on it today, so they're only going to be paying taxes like it's a residential use. So the assessment office and planning don't completely overlap. They might look at it, but not all the time.
So if the factory gets built, would they reclass the property as commercial automatically, or because of the rural plan? But because it also falls inside of St. Andrews now, who would be responsible for that? Like,
You're talking about the property on the point?
the property, or even the property where the Lobster facility is going to go, because it's technically residential but not. That's kind of what you're saying.
What we have seen and what would likely happen is when they are issued, let's say the PAC decided to approve this, and the applicant got their files together to make a building permit request, or building permit, and then we review it, we issue the building permit, and that information, that's going to be sent to Service New Brunswick, and at that time they could reclassify the property. They would see what the construction value is. They would look at the intended use. So we send them all that information, and at that time they would likely change the classification of the property in their tax system.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get in my head around a residential piece of property and we're allowing commercial activity. I'm trying to get my head around that. Okay. Another quick question I have is regarding the mean water high setback. What is the provincial regulation regarding mean high water setbacks in the province of New Brunswick?
So this is a great question. In the cases of fresh water or brackish water, so where you have like an inlet that is like the mouth of a river, at a certain point it will change from brackish to open. It's called open ocean. And the reason I'm talking about these things is because there's a regulation, the Watercourse and Wetland Alteration Regulation, that will regulate soil disturbances, any kinds of soil disturbances within 30 meters of the watercourse or wetland. But again, this only applies to lands next to freshwater or brackish water. In this case, this would be considered an open ocean waterfront. And there isn't a regulation that the province has for dealing with developments near the open ocean. So you can develop right next to it if that complies with local planning. So really local planning is the only regulation at this time dealing with setbacks from the ocean. Now there are, if you're going across that line and going onto the mudflats, then you're going to be talking with the Department of Natural Resources and Energy Development. So you remember where I was recommending that we wait till they get their license from Natural Resources for the outtake pipe? It's because that crosses that line and goes into the mudflats. And when it goes into the lower low tide mark and beyond, you can be working with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, which is federal. So, but yeah, currently they have a policy recommending setbacks, but this would have been something that should have been considered when the rural plan was adopted, but it didn't come into effect with the Chamcook area rural plan regulations. So the province has a policy that encourages setbacks from ocean, but it's not required.
The only reason I ask this, because I know when we sat on council, and we had to deal with the new provincial regulation, and at one time, they wanted 20 meters, then the province wanted to put it up to 30 meters, but because we were a municipality, we weren't allowed to enact our own law on, say, Water Street, because you went 30 meters, something burned down, well, you'd never rebuild it, because mean high water would put you on the other side of the road. And I'm just wondering, at the time when they put that in, wasn't it established on all federal mean high water marks or provincial high water marks?
So
That same number?
what,
You know,
no, it's a good question. So what that would have been, I think you're talking about the municipal plan of 2020 for the town of St. Andrews. So we had looked at the St. Croix Corridor regulation, which is a local planning regulation that applied in what was the local service district of Bayside, all the way up around St. Stephen and beyond, close to Macadam. And that regulation is still in effect to a large extent, but basically it stopped at the former town site boundaries of St. Andrews, and there wasn't a similar type of setback from the St. Croix River in the town. So we looked at this as saying, well, maybe there's some sort of way there could be a complementary, it could follow down into St. Andrews, right to the point of St. Andrews. But that was looked at by council, and I think they came to a conclusion that they would want to permit developments in these areas that were adapted to the risk of being close to the water. So meaning building up higher, as opposed to having a setback, a firm setback, you should not build within 30 meters. So that was what was decided, and that's what's in effect right now. It wasn't really based on a federal or provincial requirement, but based on best practice, because there are risks of building close to the ocean. So it's one of those things which, you can do this, but you have to consider the risks of being close to the water.
okay. Let her go, I'll keep going after.
Are you sure you need a break?
So, Alex, the Chamcook Rural Plan came into effect in 2012, correct? And I think the provincial regulations or expectations were that the rural plans would have been reviewed every 10 years. Is that correct? So it should have been done in 2022. But I think because at that point we were starting to talk about amalgamation, that plan never had an opportunity to be reviewed, correct?
That's correct.
So one of the challenges with that is that the former LSD didn't have an opportunity to look at does the Chamcook rural area have the correct zoning policies in place? And I wonder, even in terms of the policy recommendation around the setback, that could have been something that the LSD would have reviewed if the plan had been reviewed as it should have been in 2022, correct?
Yeah, it could have been reviewed, yeah.
Right. So, but it still stays in place, even though we have amalgamation. That rural plan is still in effect, even though we've amalgamated with the larger the town of St. Andrews.
That's correct.
And as a municipality, all of our plans, our municipal plan for the town of St. Andrews, the two rural plans for Chamcook and Bayside, and our zoning bylaws, those are all in the process of being reviewed currently, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. It's just a real challenge. The Chamcook kind of got caught in a bit of political bureaucracy in terms of not being able to really update that plan and make it current to the day. That's a statement. I'll say that's a statement. Thanks.
Anyone else for the planner? Yes.
Going back to the noise, so I did a little bit of research, and 37 STC rating, according to Google and some other searches, consists of 2x4 wood stud 16 inches apart with one layer of gypsum board on each side. So what that means, so that didn't mean much to me, I just thought. So I did some more searching, and what that means is that loud speech is clear on the other side of the wall. So I'm just having a hard time getting my head around how loud this is going to be on the other side of the wall, outside for the neighbors, because this is a residential area. 20, 25 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been having this conversation, but now there's homes everywhere and families, and so I'm just trying to get my head around what kind of noise is this going to be, and is this light industrial?
So, if I may, Madam Chair, so I'm not an expert in this area, so I cannot say exactly how loud that would be. But I can basically state that this is what we looked at as a reasonable standard in another instance of this kind of development up on the coast. And again, I don't think necessarily the buffer requirement is in compelling you to eliminate all noises completely, but the idea being that as you mitigate them to reduce impact. And in a lot of cases, reducing impact is the best thing you can accomplish. So unfortunately, I don't have a clear answer as to what kind of decibel rating or what that could be compared to. It's just outside of my expertise.
Okay. One more question.
Yes, absolutely.
So overflow discharge from this facility is going to go into Passamaquoddy Bay. Has there been, when we look at the plan, what are the considerations about the residents around with the sewage side of the discharge? Because they had said last week that the only thing that will be discharged into the bay will be from the holding tanks, from these RAS circulating tanks, and the effluent from the lobsters. But when they clean the tanks, when they clean the pipes, doing some more research, besides the fact that they said they will only be using water, it's after talking to some people, it looks like you kind of have to use some other cleaning products, especially for the pipes and the motors and pumps and things that are going to have to go into a septic holding tank. Is there any? And then I'm thinking about the residents' water. Is there any control point that would be put in place, that could be put in place to help protect the residents around, or what happens when if the residents' wells become affected?
So this is a very good question. So I think I think it's a two-part question. The first part is one which I won't be able to give a detailed answer on, is that a septic system that they're proposing would be require a plumbing permit from the Department of Public Safety, plumbing inspector. So they would just have to look at the technical on-site guidelines for placing a septic system. And on their site plan, I believe they showed a proposed location that they would have. I believe they'd be applying to make sure that they could obtain a plumbing permit. So that means spatial separations between their proposed septic field and a neighboring well, and that's part of a plumbing permit approval. The second part is the wells and impact on drinking water. And so there could be a risk there if there's saltwater wells, and the way to address that risk is to require that no approval take place until an EIA approval is in our hands, or there is an exemption, written exemption from the branch that deals with EIAs, because they deem that the saltwater well isn't significant enough to require an EIA. However, I believe what the applicant stated in the last meeting was that they were intending to apply for EIA, but I could let the applicant address that.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So, whose responsibility is it when a neighboring property's well gets contaminated? Is it the applicant or is it the neighbor?
So, okay, so what, if the well has a consumption capacity that meets the threshold of an EIA requirement, that's where the province is deemed a risk is possible for what you're talking about. And if they do cross that threshold, then it's the Department of Environment and Local Government experts who are experts on water and this question who would address it and say they could put terms and conditions on that well. They could make them do certain engineered systems that would reduce potential for impacts on neighboring wells. And that's a whole process unto itself to look at the water consumption. So really, the experts at the Department of Environment and Local Government would deal with that question.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else for the planner? Yes, Mr. Cross.
I'm going to go back to your noise thing for a minute. This seems to be the topic of the night. As far as the STC levels and everything that goes, and you say, you know, you've come to best practices from another facility or other facilities in other places and whatever, and you say the building inspectors are certified to be able to look at these and know that they're the right levels or what have you. Is there some sort of device that they use to measure these, or is this just through the types of building materials that they're using and whatever? So it's just kind of a best practice, I guess you could say, as opposed to a definitive.
Yeah, it would be more like the latter. It's more based on experiences and working with different applications of the code to different occupancies and what they have seen apply. So that's what that conversation was. And again, I'm not a code official. However, there's code officials that I work with. But no, it's essentially based on best practices. They wouldn't be using. They don't use sound equipment like an audiologist or something who can make expert determinations on decibel readings and things like that. No, it's about building materials and making sure that you have reasonable mitigation of noise through those building materials.
Mr. Ingles, anything else from you that's come up? No? Okay, so now we'll hear from the applicant, I guess, based on this this updated planning report. Does anyone want to make a presentation?
We have our technical expert online.
Oh, I see. Oh, all right. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Can I share my screen if that's possible?
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
All right. Yeah, so while we're waiting, as many of you know from the last PAC meeting, I'm a marine biologist, and I've been asked by St. Mary's First Nation to be a technical advisor to the project. I've worked for many years, over 20 years, in the fishery, live lobster holding systems in particular. I've been involved in the design and construction of many such systems. I got my feet wet working for Clearwater Live Lobster back in the day, and I was in fact staff biologist and later on senior biologist with Clearwater Lobster. And after that, I went out and did a lot of consulting in the industry, and I've seen a lot of live lobster holding systems, from big ones to small ones and everything in between, from very technical to very simple. So that's a little bit of my background. I wanted to touch on a few things that were talked about here today to hopefully provide a little bit of clarity regarding those questions that were going around.
Mr. Desbarrett,
So-
the share screen is available for you.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I wanted to touch on the STC. I am by no means an expert in that area as well, but I did want to share with you the logic that we used when we sort of chose the numbers that we went with, and the materials as well that we went with. What we learned when we did the background search on it is that the kind of material that you use is very important in mitigating the frequency of the sound that's produced. And there are some materials that are very good at mitigating sounds from high frequency, but they're not very good at low frequency, and vice versa as well. We chose concrete in this particular application because the noise that's going to be generated by the pumps, air blowers, and such are all low frequency sounds. They're in the 60 hertz range. And concrete is very good at mitigating sounds in the lower end of the frequency spectrum. So if you see here, like for this example here, we see here at the 63 hertz range, the yellow line here is the concrete. So at the 63 hertz range for an STC 58 barrier, you would see in the range of 37-ish decibel reduction in noise. So in other words, if you had 63 hertz hitting that barrier, it's going to be mitigated or reduced by approximately 37 hertz before that sound gets to the other side of that barrier. So it would drop from its 63 hertz down to less than 60 hertz on the other side of that barrier. We have, I think it's also important to note as well that we have multiple layers of sound mitigation. It's not just one layer. Like, I think there's a lot of sort of thought around this wall that is, that's the only barrier, and that's not the case. We have the majority of the equipment in this application, and there's approximately 20 horsepower's worth of equipment in the application, which is not a lot of horsepowers, by the way, but we have air blowers, we have pumps, primarily, and then we have the chilling system. The air blowers and pumps will all be inside the building, and they will be inside an insulated room. So there will be a certain amount of, well, quite a bit of noise mitigation across that wall, probably to the tune of around STC 37 mitigation across that wall. The pumps and air blowers will also be mounted on rubber, which is a very common thing to do these days. And again, that by mounting equipment on rubber pads, it helps to mitigate the noise resulting from vibration, for example. So you're going to get the mitigation across that wall, that insulated wall, and then you'll get further mitigation across the STC 37 boundary wall. That's for the air blowers and pumps. And then for the chilling system, we have an STC 55 barrier around those. So the same thing applies there. You're going to get noise mitigation across that initial barrier. And then that noise has to carry, by the way, it has to carry through the air. And air itself is a noise mitigator. And then it will carry 30, 40, 50, 60 feet to the concrete wall, and then it'll get further mitigated there. So chances are, this is going to be probably one of the quietest facilities or residences or buildings on the street in actuality. You're going to certainly be, like in the probably in the whisper range on the other side of that wall. We did use a decibel meter. Jeremy can speak to that a little bit as well. He's the one who, when they visited a live lobster holding system in, which a very standard one. They have the outdoor chiller compressors, no walls around them. And on the boundary of the property, it was registering in the range of a whisper. So, it would be my feeling personally, because these operations, they don't have a lot of mechanical equipment in them. They're very low energy intense systems. It would be my feeling that you don't even need that 10-foot barrier, that the mitigation that we have in the building, in the rooms that the equipment is going to be surrounded by, and the concrete STC 55 barrier that's going to be surrounding the chilling system, that will probably be enough. You're not going to get a heck of a lot of noise off that property. But because of feedback from residents and feedback from Alex and others stating, what are you going to do to further mitigate noise? That was when we came back and said, okay, we'll put up a further concrete fence around the property to allay those concerns. So I felt that it's important to mention that because there's been some pushback regarding this wall, this 10-foot wall, and this sense that this wall that we need this wall to mitigate the noise. In my opinion, that is not the case. That is something that the residents have asked for, and that is something that we have provided. My personal feeling, like I said, you don't need it, but we're happy to put it there to further allay any concerns regarding noise coming off of that property. I also wanted to touch base a little bit on cleaning agents. Just stop sharing my screen there. So I know that you can talk to one live lobster holding system provider and he'll say, yeah, you need to use chlorine, and then you'll talk to another guy and he'll say, yeah, you need to use whatever. But I can tell you from experience, you don't. You just need to use fresh water. Remember, this is a marine environment. These animals are being held in salt water. The bugs, like the bacteria, the protozoans, the viruses that are existing in that salt water, they do not do very well in fresh water. So fresh water is an excellent disinfectant to use. It's the kind of disinfectant that I encourage all of my clients to use. The important thing is husbandry, good husbandry. If you get in there and you clean your system once every season, and they will have the ability to do that because they're going to be shut down through the months of August, September, and October, gives them lots of time to get in and do a thorough cleaning of all of the piping and all of the internal tanking and all of the internal piping as well with fresh water, and then just let it sit in air dry. Air drying is also a very good disinfectant tactic as well. So again, like, cleaning agents are not required in live lobster holding systems. That is completely false. That is misinformation. I would also like to speak a little bit to the well contamination. I don't quite understand where that concern is coming from. Again, if you're not using any kind of cleaning agents, there should be no well contamination at all. Also on the water supply side, without question, as Alex alluded to, an EIA would have to be done, and certainly that EIA, we would have to follow any of the recommendations inside that EIA to ensure that any water that is being withdrawn from that saltwater well is done in a manner that's sustainable for everybody in that community. And also too, it's not, this operation doesn't hinge on a saltwater well. If that EIA determines that there could be risk associated with pulling water from a saltwater well because it could impact the aquifer, then obviously, then that's a no-go. Then it would lead to then withdrawing salt water from the bay, as is a standard way of doing it in live lobster holding systems, to draw from the bay, and then that we would do it that way, and in that case, it would go through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for a withdrawal permit in that case.
Anything else? Is that all from? Does the committee have any questions for the applicant and updated information? Yes?
I have a question on the cleaning aspect of this facility. You say in your experience that it's water is the best cleaning agent or whatever, but I mean, we're talking of a lobster facility, so it's holding something. There must be some a relative standard to a food grade standard or something that somebody has to inspect it from at some point in time. And I find it difficult to get my head around that water would be the only thing that would be acceptable as a cleaning agent. I've done a little research on my own, and it just seems that most of these facilities do use chemicals to clean, and that's a concern that I have as to, you know, where this is going and what kind of contamination it's going to create to the environment once it's released. So.
So this is, it's not a CFI because they are not a processor, they're not CFIA certified. So you're speaking to, when you talk about this would have to be, you know, like regulated or looked at from an outside regulatory agency, that's not the case. Because the live lobster are sold to a processor somewhere else, that would be their responsibility. But where this facility is holding live lobster to sell to a distributor, there is no CFIA requirement regarding you have to use cleaning agent X, Y, or Z to clean your facility. It's up to the facility operator. And again, in my expert opinion, I always recommend fresh water, just for that reason, because I have seen applications where they do use chlorine, and in my professional opinion, it's completely unrequired, and it's quite damaging, obviously, to the environment.
Yes, Councillor Harland.
Just wanted to add another piece to that, to the issue of cleaning. So I did look at Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has quite a comprehensive guideline for the development of live lobster facilities, and they do speak to the cleaning. They speak to the cleaning both of the tanks, but also of the facility itself, which is required in Nova Scotia anyway, that cleaning agents are used, and they have to document it as part of their monthly reporting, what they use and how often they clean, et cetera, et cetera. So in New Brunswick, we don't have anything similar to this, to a guideline as our sister province? No?
That I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for the applicant? Yes.
So I've also had an opportunity to talk to another lobster holding facility operator, and one of the other things that he mentioned was about the lighting. So I recognize that in your application you talk about compliance to the dark sky compliance, but when you're talking about loading and unloading lobsters in the winter months, it would be dark. And I think workplace health and safety would require sort of appropriate industrial lighting during those periods of time to ensure the safety of everyone. So I'm assuming that that night sky compliance would only be for the off hours. Is that correct?
Well, obviously, the facility would have to abide by any occupational health and safety requirements. There is a requirement, of course, or a condition under the proposed variance approval regarding that there can be no activity between the periods of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. You're not going to have a lot of dark periods during that period of time. I mean, that can be certainly something that, you know, if lighting is pointing down and not horizontally, then it would be, and I'm no expert in this, but it would be my opinion that you are lighting the area where you need to work, and therefore you are not you're impacting where you need to work and you're not impacting elsewhere around you. So that's the whole point of the dark sky concept. And that was what we tried to, again, to allay the concerns of the public regarding the possibility that lights would be shining horizontally. And frankly, a light that, in my opinion, that's shining horizontally isn't doing you any good as a worker, because that's not where your workspace is, it's down. So it makes logical sense to point the light where you need it and not where it doesn't need to be pointed. The other thing too, because we would have this barrier in here, that 10-foot high wall, which the client intends to make every effort to make it look very, like, a nice wall, not something ugly. But that will also, I would suspect, mitigate quite a bit of light as well. Because if you can, again, you want to shine light on your workspace. So if you're getting that light below the 10-foot level shining on your workspace, I would think that there's not going to be a lot of light shining horizontally over that wall.
Okay, so thank you. So when I had an opportunity to speak to another operator, one of the things he talked about certainly was the smell. And having been at a lobster holding facility in the summer on Graham and Ann, I can tell you it's smelly. And I appreciate the fact that the dead lobster are going to go into a tank and into a reefer to try to mitigate some of the smell. But there is still the operation of a lobster holding facility, which will, there'll be juices that will come, lobster juices that will come off the trucks as they come into the facility, just the day-to-day or just the general operations of the business. And I was also sort of intrigued by what's happening right now in the province in Restigouche. So in Restigouche, there was a plant built, and I realize we're talking a different type of industry, but there was a plant built to burn lobster and crab shells to use it in other products. And it was approved and built, and the smell is now having significant detrimental effects on the residents around that area. And it's challenging because the facility is built. And now the residents aren't, they talk about not being able to be out in their, on their properties when the facility is running because the smell is so intense. And I just need to speak to what the MLA for Kent North spoke about with respect to this issue. So the MLA for Kent North is Kevin Arsenault, and he said in response to this issue, this facility has the right to exist, but it is not in the right place. It is a planning problem. It should never have been allowed to be in the center of a region that is based in tourism. So my concern is we have 1.1 acres of land in a very residential area and a facility that, while you are mitigating the odor with respect to the dead lobster, there is still going to be odor, and the impact that's going to have in the residents' experience of their properties. Do you have anything you can say to that or speak to that?
I mean, I can speak to it sort of like anecdotally, really. I mean, like I've never walked around with an odor meter and measured smells, but I do appreciate what you're speaking to. I have, there are two types of situations where you can get, well, one really, where you can get a lot of smell off of a live lobster holding system, and that's when the truck comes to remove those dead lobster. And the lobster are typically held in 200-liter barrels. And what is done is as dead lobster are collected, they get thrown into that barrel. And then once they filled the barrel, they put a lid on it and they roll it outside. Now, that is, in my opinion, not very smelly, like at that point in time. You can't, I've never noticed, like I've never walked into an operation and said, holy smokes, like this is just knocking my socks off. But when the truck comes to pick up those dead lobster and they pull the lid off of that, then the smell hits you. Yeah, for sure. That's smelly at that point in time. And so again, in discussions with St. Mary's First Nation, we said, we're not going to do it that way because that is smelly. So how can we, and the community members have a legitimate concern, what can we do to mitigate that concern? And that was where we decided that if you take those dead lobster as they die, you put them straight into refrigerated storage right away. Like at the end of the day, you collect your live lobster, doesn't matter, or your dead lobster, doesn't matter if you have 5 pounds. Put it in the freezer right away. And when it's a fresh dead, there's no smell coming off it. I mean, it's no different from, you know, the ocean. Like if you don't like the smell of the ocean, then you don't want to build your house beside the ocean, because I mean, that's basically the smell that you're going to get off of a live lobster holding system where the animals are fresh, the water is fresh, everything's operating as it should be operating. It's the dead lobster that would definitely be an odor concern. And so if we're moving those dead lobster into that freezer right away, you're mitigating that concern. I mean, you are wiping it right off of the plate of concerns. And then when you have enough product to move to landfill, you call up the landfill guy, he comes down. When he arrives, you pop those dead lobster, still frozen, in blocks of ice in the back of his trailer. He goes away. You're not going to smell a thing. That would be my opinion. Like that is, I can tell you from my experience, nobody in the live lobster holding industry does that, but St. Mary's First Nation will.
So I have a question with respect to the hours of operation, and I don't know who wants to speak to this. But again, when I had an opportunity to speak to another lobster holding facility provider, in that particular facility, there's no restrictions on when trucks can come to deliver lobster or when trucks can go. So, you know, what he said is that in his facility, they come at all hours up to 1 o'clock in the morning. But it did make me think about one of the terms and conditions on this variance application is that the facility won't operate between 8 at night and 7 in the morning. So then, and I know that wasn't your initial request. I think your request was to operate through the night. So my son-in-law is a lobster fisherman, so I know a little bit about sort of some of the hours that he works. And lobsters, if they're landed, if depending on when they get landed and they get loaded into a truck, they may or may not make that 8 o'clock deadline. So I'm assuming then that lobsters would have to be kept in a reefer truck because they would have to be kept in ideal conditions. So my question would be, where would that reefer truck sit? Would it sit on the property waiting until the facility opens at 7 in the morning? Would the reefer truck sit on the wharf? Like, how would that work? And I think you need to go to the mic.
Yeah, we have multiple partners that we are working with currently. Our facility is going to be for long-term storage to obviously increase the market price. But with your question, after the 8 p.m., we either hold them on the boat. We have live wells in all our big vessels. We can hold them at the wharf, in a truck, partnering facility. We have lots of other options to meet all these conditions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, yes, Paul.
Sorry, I just need to provide clarification to PAC. Councillor Harlan, you mentioned Restigouche. It's actually Rishabukto. So thank you.
The wrong R.
All right, if there's no further questions for the applicant or the planner, we do have a couple of presenters to focus on the new information that we received. So, oh, I'm very sorry.
Going back to where you're going to be getting lobsters from, is there any, do you guys fish at all in the gray zone?
No, we do not.
No? Okay, that answers my question, how you're going to shut down for August, September, October, yeah, from August to October. Thanks. One more question. Has there been any consideration about pest control? At the facility?
Well, yes, Adrian and I have discussed it quite extensively, and there isn't going to be any chance for an animal to get inside. They may be snooping around the premises, but they're not going to be able to get inside. And if there's a problem on the premises, then we will deal with it as we need to, whether it's a pest control or traps or whatever, removal of raccoons or whatever. I'm pretty sure there's quite a few raccoons already in the area.
So I've back in my early 20s, I fished on Grand Manan. We lobster fished, and I know from a lot of these facilities have quite a bit of Oregon is there. They have a lot of they have a lot of traps outside. I'm kind of concerned about the pest control in terms of this is a residential area. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fence, this 10-foot fence, is going to be an L-shaped fence, and it's going to be open to the water, correct? Correct? Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. So going back to the residents, I'm thinking about the dogs. Right now, they're in rural, dogs can run around people's yards, and thinking about the smell that will be coming from the facility, and any pets that I've had are going to be trying to get in there. And then I'm thinking about the the outdoor bait stations and things that you're going to have in place for the rats. Is there any thought about closing in the putting a wall the whole way around it?
We're not opposed to that idea. If that's a recommendation, we can certainly work with that. For the record, I'm a lobster fisherman myself, been fishing since 2001, so this isn't just an idea I've dreamt up overnight. Commercial captain since 2005, so I've been very well versed in the lobster industry as well.
Now, anytime whoever our lobster purchasers were, they would supply us with bait, and most of the time
we'll be doing the same.
You do the same, so you'll be storing the bait in Chamcook too?
We have a freezer already existing, which is not on that property, but we would likely have bait in the freezer with the dead lobster, yes.
Okay, so is the when the lobsters die, I believe they're going to be stored outside in a reefer truck?
They'll be stored same day in the reefer storage, yes.
In a reefer stored within a facility or
No,
outside?
outside.
Outside, so that's going
a
to be...
separate entity, like a separate facility.
So that's going to be a separate facility on this facility, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's also going to be running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Yeah, noise mitigation, the same as we've already explained previously.
Correct, yeah. It'll have an SDC 55 barrier around it as well, and it's not a diesel operated freezer. It's an it'll be an electric operated freezer, so certainly, you won't have a diesel engine going on in the background.
What about, speaking of diesel engines, what about when the power goes out for a week?
We'll
certainly
have
the
backup
facility will
generators.
have it'll have a backup diesel generator, yeah, correct.
Okay, so the residential folks that live next door get to experience that also?
Well, and I'm sure they can also come down and get a hot cup of coffee as well.
Yeah, no, just want to make sure we have everything covered.
I don't think it's going to be the only generator going in the event of a power outage.
No, I wouldn't think.
That's all I have. Thank you.
right, so we do still have two presenters to hear from, if you wanted to.
I'd like to ask Ms. Brenda Waywood to come to the podium and make a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. Your package includes a lengthy document, and I apologize for that I sent in prior to knowing the concerns of DTI. The concerns I have about lot lines, the area occupied on the lot, or the position of the 3-meter wall on the property have not been addressed in their latest site plan. I really feel that St. Mary's Band is owed apologies from both their consultants and the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission Planning Group. The issues raised by all of us who have objected and DTI should have been addressed prior to the proposal going to the PAC in October 2022. The lengthy process we are all enduring is stressful for everyone involved. My question now is to you. How many times does a proponent get to revise their presentation before a decision is made? Thank you.
Our final presenter is Ms. Gail Reed. I would like to ask her to come to the podium.
Hi. I guess I'll just get started. So my first slide here is another beautiful picture of Chamcook Harbor, because I wanted to take a minute to say thank you to you guys for being here and for taking the time. I know this has been an extremely lengthy process for all of us, and I appreciate your time and energy and all of your questions that you had this evening. I was really actually quite happy to hear Alex Henderson speaking tonight, because I was going to speak to some of the points that he brought up, namely that he did mention that the Chamcook Planning Area Rural Plan, the #1 objective to preserve the area's rural character and lifestyle. Mr. Henderson in his planning report pointed out that, that this is subjective and discretionary, and that this can be determined by the PAC. I think that the community is clearly spoken as to what they envisioned when they chose to live in this area and what the character and lifestyle is of the Chamcook area. It's quiet and minimal, not loud and 24/7. Mr. Henderson also spoke about an application needing to be sufficiently similar to or compatible with a permitted use. And he said that the PAC should give consideration to determining that the proposed use of the land, buildings, or structure doesn't compromise the intent to such a degree as to be considered outside of the zone. I would propose that this is outside of the zone because of all of the time and energy that's been required for this. If it was simply to just be approved, none of this would be required, as Mr. Henderson stated earlier. If it was just me standing here and I was complaining to you guys because my property values halved, because my experience is decreased when I'm outside on my property, if I was talking about feeling safe on the road and it was just me, sort of tough luck, you picked the wrong location, right? But there's clearly been community support with this, and they've clearly said that we don't think that this is the right place for this particular facility. This is a rezoning by variance. It's not a simple minor variance that we're talking about here. When you look at the new information, which is what I was told that I was allowed to speak about this evening from the DTI, I appreciate that there's a 2.5 meter setback that has been agreed and acknowledged upon. What this does is it makes this lot even smaller. So if we look at the buffer zones that we're allowed to use, if we do in fact consider this light industrial, and we do consider this non-polluting, but we need these buffer zones to be in place to prevent the pollution from going into neighboring properties. When we look at these buffer zones, the one to the east is literally falling into the ocean. I was there this morning. These last couple of major storms, there's been major chunks of clay that have slid down all along the shoreline. So my question to the PAC is, is there a retaining wall to be included in the recommendations? So that eastern shoreline that's going to be the sound buffer for all of the waterways of Chamcook Harbor, if it's just going to fall into the ocean, it's not really acting as a buffer zone, and there's not a lot of room for movement there. The fence that has been discussed a lot this evening, does this need a 1 meter setback for maintenance? I'm asking the PAC for their expertise on this. And on the southern boundary, there's also a proposed well site, and there is also an easement for water access in that 5 meter buffer zone. And I'm wondering, how does that affect planting, growth, and maintenance of trees? How does that affect actually having a 5 meter buffer zone? If all we're requiring is 5 meters of vegetation, we need to make sure that that's actually there. And what is the timeline for these buffers to grow in? As I showed you at the last meeting, none of those trees are there along my property line. They just don't exist, they were cut down. So is there a timeline where this needs to have full vegetation, or it needs to have what have you? I know there was discussion about the STC ratings for this fence that has been talked about, and I appreciate the low frequency vibrations. Cement is great for that. What about the high frequency vibrations, the backup trucks, the beeping of the backup trucks? Those are high frequency. That's not going to mitigate, that's not going to prevent that sound from traveling across the harbor and to the neighboring residential properties. The weight restrictions, I appreciate that those were acknowledged and they have been agreed upon. The road distress will occur. What is the plan to deal with this? I can tell you right now, there's road distress occurring on all of our rural roads, right? It's springtime, that's what's happening. This road's not in the 5-year plan. So what happens as it deteriorates between, if this is approved, between now and whenever they come out with their next 5-year plan? The DTI clearly states that the condition of the road will not support heavy trucking. I have an honest question for the PAC. How is the weight monitored? Who does? I have no idea how that happens, or when it happens, or why it happens. Does that have to be called in for heavy trucking? I don't know how that works, but it's a question for the PAC. And then the last one is, yes, the DTI stated this is a very narrow road. Trucks will most likely take up both lanes of traffic. This is a one-way in street, as we all know. It's the busiest dead-end road I've ever seen, but what is the safety plan for people who are out walking? And because a picture takes 1,000 words, or whatever that saying is, it's more than 1,000 words, we have a video to share with you of the roadway. And I'm just wondering, for what is the safety plan? At the very least, does there not need to be some signage that says narrow road, blind hill, S-bend, or dead end? So this video shows a truck, a pickup truck, and a trailer right at the edge of the property. They're on the property now. You can see the condition of the road, and that vehicle is fully taking up that roadway. Here, where the boundary is, the road does get a little bit wider, but you can see as we enter into the S-bend further up that the traffic actually has to use the soft shoulders when they're driving to pass each other. This is sort of, as most of you know, the S-bend that goes up, and then it terminates at the top there in a mailbox. So that's a community mailbox, a gathering place. And the road is very, very narrow. So I Googled, the average width of a pickup truck is 6 meters. The average width of a cube van is 7. So you have to add half a foot on either side. And a transport truck is about 8 meters. So you have to add more to that. And when you see here, this is looking up Harkness Road. This is the school bus coming down. The buses are not allowed to go on to St. Andrews North Road. I spoke to a couple bus drivers and asked why. All they said was they've been told they're not allowed to, it's not safe, so all children have to be dropped off. This is at the bottom of a hill and a blind corner on the other side, so it's already a pretty unsafe place to let kids off the bus, but this is where they have to go because there's nowhere else for the buses to go. As these kids walk down St. Andrews North Road, headed for home, when cars are trying to pass them, and again, these are average size vehicles, these are not trucks. None of these are trucks because I didn't have any access to any trucks. They have to use the soft shoulder, and the pedestrians themselves have to step off onto the side in order to be safe. So when we have people coming into this area that don't know the area, that are not community members, how are they going to navigate this in a safe way? I'll let you guys just watch the rest of that because you can see as they're passing, the white vehicle is significantly over onto the soft shoulder. And it is an unsafe condition. So what are we going to do to make a plan for that? I would urge you to revoke this decision. This is not the right location for this type of industry, and this area has not been identified as per the statements of public interest as a fisheries activities area. We haven't had time to do that. If that would happen, I understand that all of these concerns that we have would be addressed at that time. But at this, for this particular application, I strongly urge you to revoke this decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Reed. All right, well, this concludes the public presentations. We now go over to the committee. Actually,
You are? Jack Gibbon? Yes, Jack Gibbon did request to speak after the closing date.
oh, I see. Oh, I apologize. Yes, please come forward. Are you aware that we have a bit of a time limit on commentary? Okay, up to 10 minutes, if you don't mind?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
As a matter of fact, Madam Chairman. Sachem, Alan Porches. Greetings, sir. Councils. As an opening statement, I said I was restricted from what I could comment on the upcoming meeting from the letter provided. PAC is accepting comments specifically as it relates to the blue highlighted portion of the change of placement of the building by 2 meters to the right. Had I known, in fact, it was open to general comments, I would have made general comments, but fortunately, I've actually brought my general comments with me. I'll start with what was initially I was allowed to say. So we respectfully submit the following response and views on the new information provided by the staff by the superintendent at the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, DTI. To be clear, we fully support the proposed Lobster holding facility to be located at the dead end of the St. Andrews North Road. We see it as a quality improvement to the image, tax base, and marketability of St. Andrews, and a highly positive marketable opportunity for a variety of restaurants and businesses in St. Andrews, including the Algonquin Hotel. It will also provide employment opportunities for local trades persons to supply ongoing, speedy emergency and technical support to the Lobster holding facility. The issue was that according to the site plan, the building does not meet DTI setback standards. The highlighted comment and response by, I believe it was the engineer, who said that the applicant has adjusted its proposed building location by 2.5 meters to meet the setback requirements. Our comments are, the Lobster facility applicant was easily able to modify their plan to mitigate the DTI setback issue by satisfactorily adjusting the building position. The site plan indicates that there is adequate room and flexibility at the site to accommodate the adjustment. It will not negatively impact any of the previously established and agreed upon modifications completed in order to satisfy both the PRAC and the PAC requirements. This clearly demonstrates the efficient design characteristics, adequate footprint area, and the good faith that the applicants have shown and continue to display throughout the approval process. As I said before, my name is Jack Gibbon. Hannah agrees with my positions, and some of these positions are Hannah's. We live on Harkness Road. We live on Harkness Road, which is actually more Harkness Freeway. I will take the liberty of reading some of my comments that I sent, understanding that this has been opened up to comments. Trucking. Though the applicant has responded with the weight restrictions in good faith, in comparison, most, if not all, of the heavy construction and delivery trucks mentioned earlier are a magnitude heavier than any trucks carrying lobster to the site. It is hard to imagine that you could pack lobsters deep enough, wide enough, or high enough in any kind of a truck that would result in that truck being anywhere close to the weight of a fully loaded tandem gravel, sand, filled, topsoil, dump truck, cement, construction materials, or propane trucks that regularly ply that road and the roads on Harkness. Speaking of which, I believe there's going to be about, at the maximum, 15 trucks a week go down there, including the workers' vehicles going down. On Harkness Road, if you could tell me that you would keep the business on Harkness Road down to 15 trucks, I believe every person on Harkness Road would be dancing on that road naked. They'd be so happy. That is not a lot of trucks. And every one of those trucks I listed are presently working St. Andrews North Road to build that house, as every one of those trucks that I listed also worked to build the houses there. In fact, the DTI is cordially invited to set up a mobile weighing facility to ensure that all trucks meet the 43,500 kilogram road rating. DTI will need to preside year-round also, as even in January this year, we noticed, there have been tandem axle dump trucks driving by fully loaded with gravel fill and leaving the area with cuttings. Tree cuttings and clearings. It's heartening to see that DTI has developed a keen interest in St. Andrews area. Speaking of which, the St. Andrews North Road is as wide at the barrier as it is at the top. The only difference is that that road from the last residence house heading towards the point has overgrown. Sand and dirt, detritus, grass has grown up in there, brush has filled the ditches up to the edge of the road. It was built at the same time that Harkness was road, more or less, built of the same material to the same width. I could address the water problem, but the water situation, but we'll leave that to hydrologists. I took a couple during engineering, but I'm not a certified or hydrologist. Drilling engineer deals with it, engineering deals with it, but it's not. I'm sorry, I've got 10 minutes. Am I up? Oh, okay. Thank you. Right. There are issues with the water well that the residents drilled, possibly through a saltwater zone, and perforated the cap rock to the Sweetwater aquifer, which means that there are now at least, if not more, 3 wells that have perforated the cap rock of the Sweetwater aquifer and thus exposing that sweet aquifer to the salt water above it. That water well, the saltwater well, would stop above the cap of the Sweetwater. Were it to penetrate that cap, Sweetwater cap, the salt water would mix with the sweet water when they were pulling it out, and it would not be applicable to lobster. if the Sweetwater aquifer is polluted by salt water, there's a really good chance it's because the residents' Sweetwater wells went through it. However, there is a solution to that, and it's running right down in front of those residential homes, all the way down to the first residence, just past their driveway. It's a St. Andrews treated freshwater supply line that runs from the pump station, which has a wide open, fully lit light on it, which you see at all times of the night, down along that rail line, and there's a sideline that goes down that used to feed the industries that were down there, even up to the more recent ones. And there was a recent industry that was in that property, on your property. All you have to do is go down to the beach and look up, and you see the 3 white PVC, fairly modern drain pipes that are sticking out of the bank. Well, I'm really disappointed that, in fact, I was limited to just what I had to say. I don't know what else to say about it, but except that I understand why the engineer wanted to or specified primary colors on there, because as you notice on that S-bend, there's a barn that is about as long as the facility is going to be wide, and it's a primary color. You may or may not have noticed it. It wasn't in the original pictures or anything like that, but it is there, as is just around the corner on Harkness from St. Andrews North Road are 2 really large rubberized arched barn-type buildings that are the boat chandlery that's there, okay? Those are primary colors too. Most of the houses on the main street in St. Andrews are primary colors. Tight roads, we want to talk about tight roads, look at Water Street. The main technique of driving down Water Street during most of the year is named after a dog. It's called Pekingese. Because the trucks are all over there, people are hopping out of the cars, you've got to kind of peek around the corner and then ease your vehicle around. All of the streets in this town are narrow.
Mr. Gibbons,
Thank you for your time. I'm done.
Thank you. Okay. Back to the committee at this stage. We're going to get a motion on the table, and then we will begin to debate.
So I move that the Planning Advisory Committee of the Town of St. Andrews revoke the decision of the PAC made in October 2022 and deny the variance application considering the lobster holding facility as proposed by the St. Mary's First Nation on the subject lot PID 150448811 to be similar to or compatible with light industrial use. Paul, do I have wording correct? Okay.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Mr. Tanner? All right. All right, so it's time to discuss. If you wanted to get us going, sure.
Sure. So I have a few comments with respect to the motion I just made. So as a PAC, we're being asked to approve a variance by considering the proposed lobster holding facility to be similar to or compatible with a light industrial use. As Alex indicated at the beginning of his presentation tonight, he said our job is to balance between light industrial and the rural lifestyle of the current area. One of the objectives of the Chamcook Rural Plan is to encourage the development of light industrial use that is non-polluting and non-harmful to the environment. Mr. Henderson has noted that fishing and non-polluting light industry may be encouraged, as well as preserving the rural character, lifestyle, and aesthetic beauty. Mr. Henderson noted that one of the 5 statements of the Statements of Public Interest, which is the new tool that the planners and we as the municipality are required to consider in making decisions, is that a public interest and public priority to promote the agriculture, fishery, and aquaculture sectors and the production of food in the province. However, the very first SPI statement is that it is in the public interest and priority to also promote settlement patterns that enhance the well-being of the residents of the province and minimize impacts on the environment and support vibrant rural and urban communities. Within the 1 kilometer radius that was polled for this application, there are 67 homes and no other light industrial uses. In the last 20 years, there has been significant increase in residential development. We heard from many people in the polling area who spoke of why they chose to move here, to build homes and to invest in the community. They spoke about the importance of the natural environment, the peace and quiet, the ability to develop a lifestyle that incorporates the rural character and aesthetic beauty. We also heard people refer to this area as their neighborhood, and they spoke of their neighbors, and they identified typical neighborhood activities: walking to pick up the mail, walking their dogs, meeting their children at the bus stop. I support the St. Mary's First Nations' desire to further develop economic opportunities to support their community. And I appreciate the additions made to the application to address noise and light pollution. However, I believe that these measures will mitigate, not eradicate, noise and light pollution. Placing the dead lobsters in a freezer truck will assist with the level of smell. However, lobsters are a smelly business, and there will be significant odor from just the day-to-day operations of this business. I also have great concern about the effluent that will be discharged into Chamcook Harbor and the potential impact that would have on both the harbor and the very vibrant clam beds that are in that area. The Chamcook Rural Plan identifies 2 objectives related to this: to protect the area's water from pollution and to improve water quality of Chamcook Harbor, McCann Cove, Birch Cove, and the St. Croix River areas to encourage fishing, aquaculture, and clam harvesting. Mr. Henderson has noted that trucking is incidental to light industry, and I certainly understand that. However, DTI has expressed significant concerns regarding this development, given how narrow the roads are, and the fact that trucks will likely have to take up both lanes of traffic, and that truck traffic and load size will cause road distress. The applicant has indicated that during peak season, there could be anywhere from 3 to 10 trucks per day. That's what the applicant has identified, going to and from the facility. The present condition of the road will not support that kind of traffic, and this is a huge safety issue that has to be considered. We have heard very clearly from a large number of the public, including those who live directly in this residential area, as well as those who live in the larger town of St. Andrews, and they do not believe that this is the right location for this development. They have identified very clear concerns and fears. I do not believe that this variance application with 12 terms and conditions is similar to or compatible with light industry. This facility will run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. The facility includes a 7,000 square foot building with ancillary buildings and a 10-foot high concrete wall that runs the length of the property, all on a 1.1 acre lot. This application does impact the preservation of the area's rural character and lifestyle and the aesthetic beauty for both residents and tourists. Mr. Henderson in his report referenced the rural plan policy, which under residential uses states that it is a policy to discourage the intrusion of incompatible uses into established residential areas. This is an established residential area. Recently, the area has been used for inshore fishery and seaweed harvesting, which is nowhere near compatible to this particular application. So my last comment is under land use planning principles in the SPI regulations, it states that land use planning principles help guide responsible land use planning. Important planning concepts, including ensuring that local priorities reflect the interests of the public through the planning process, as well as guide decisions affecting land use and development. That is why polling of affected residents and hearing concerns is a critical part of the process. In this case, the public has clearly spoken. Given these concerns, I am not able to support this variance application.
Thanks very much.
Madam Chair, I need to seek clarification. So with the motion that was presented, a statement does need to be provided as to reasoning why you would not, or why you're looking to revoke the application. So Councillor Harland, would that be your, with the motion as with pertaining to your statement?
Yes. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, we need an amendment to the motion to include that as the statement as to reason why.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Would you care to amend the motion to include the statement? And then we'll get that reseconded.
Sorry, I just need clarification. I just need clarification about what I'm amending.
So your original motion was to revoke based on terms and the terms and conditions as you noted as the original application, but you need a reason why. So the question, you need to amend your motion to note your statement as read.
Okay. So I amend my motion to include my statement as read. Thanks.
Do we have a seconder for that amended motion? Thanks, Mr. Tanner. Appreciate that. All right, are there more comments from the committee? Mr. Ingles, I don't want you to be excluded.
No, I really appreciate that, what Councillor Harlan just did with that statement. That was a very strong statement. And I think it reflects a lot of thought, definitely, and a lot of care into the process. Two things that I'd like to just bring up, that just looking through the statement of public interest, 2 points they say in there in regards to identify current aquaculture and fishery use areas. And the purpose, they say the purpose of the policy is to recognize that fisheries and aquaculture are an important aspect of life for much of coastal New Brunswick. And I believe we all know that. We all support that. They also say that commissions may consider, in regards to land-based aquaculture facilities, may require approximately 5 to 10 acres of land, which is subjective, access to large volumes of suitable water, and transportation corridors. I don't believe that the site that we have right now fulfill that mandate. Also, it says incompatible uses with land-based aquaculture developments include residential developments, seasonal or year-round, quarries or other uses that can impact the quality and or quantity of water in the supplying aquifer. And I think we see that this proposal is definitely within a built residential area. And so I agree with the motion to this proposal in all the terms that have been raised by Councillor Harlan, and it's one of those issues where it's in many ways it's discretionary on our behalf of how we look at this, and that's the feeling I have with this. I don't feel that this is the right place for such use of land, and yeah, I agree to revoke this application.
Thanks, Mr. Ingles. All right, back to the table. Anyone else? Did you have anything to add, Mr. Kerr, Mr. Simmons, Mr. Cross? Anything more to add? All right, so we have a motion and a seconder. No more discussion? If you're ready for the question. All those in favor of the motion to revoke the PRAC's decision on this application, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There being none, that motion is carried. All right, with that having been concluded, we enter question period at this time. Quick question period for anyone? Looking around the room, going once, going. We've actually closed all the public commentary, I'm afraid. Yeah. The applicant spoke to the new information on this amended application, so this is now question period. Yeah. There are no questions. We're back to the PAC for member comments. Any other commentary tonight? No? Kevin?
Is there a appeal process to your decision tonight?
Yes, there is, yes.
If you're going to ask the question, please come up to the microphone so we have it recorded.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, just inquiring whether there's going to be appeal process to your decision tonight.
There is, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Mhm.
Can I ask a question?
You may ask a question. If you wouldn't mind just identifying yourself as well, please, thanks.
Hi there, my name is Michael Bear. I'm Councillor for St. Mary's First Nation. My question is, this appeal process, does it come back to you guys to decide? Does it come back to the same PAC to decide the appeal?
We're just going to turn that over to.
No, so if you would like to make an appeal for the decision, what we'll do is when the decision is put into writing, we'll send it to you, and you have an opportunity to appeal it. So there's a time limit for it. So one of the things we will do is help you go to the right place where you can file the appeal, and the Assessment and Planning Appeal Board will be the body that will deal with the appeal.
Okay.
So that's a provincial body.
So I just had another question. This is just about clarification. So it said that that property could be used for agricultural use, and does that have to go through an appeal or like a PAC process like this? Like a farm type?
Madam
Yes,
Chair,
sir.
So in order to do a development of land, you need to apply for a permit to do a development of land. So if there's some development you're looking at, we could discuss it, and maybe you can contact our office at the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission. We can discuss.
Okay. No, I was just curious. I was just.
No, fair
Thank
enough.
you.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Any other comments from PAC? No? All right. Well, there being none, here we go. 8:30. We've actually closed all that. We've actually closed all those opportunities. No, I'm sorry. We've closed the comments. I'm about to adjourn this meeting.
You still have a question?
We closed the question period. We moved to PAC comments. We closed the comments.
Fair to reconciliation, could I make a comment, please?
I'm afraid that comments are closed. I can't, no. I'm going to have to say no. Because I can't open it up to everyone else.
Your time is till 9 o'clock. The meeting goes to 9 o'clock.
No, 8:30.
Pardon me?
8:30.
Madam Chair, the process of PAC is a 2-hour meeting. If PAC chooses to extend the meeting, that is PAC's right and prerogative. PAC has followed the processes that were outlined in the agenda that was put out to everybody. So it is the chair's responsibility under the rules of operation on how she wishes to govern those rules in this process. So you have to respect the chair's decision.
This colonial process that we didn't have consultation into.
Mr. Chief, I have to say this process has been established under the Community Planning Act that is followed under the province.
Follow in the spirit of reconciliation. Follows the action for calls to action that we're trying to put forward here to enhance this particular area.
Chief, I have to apologize to you here. Reconciliation is not part of the Community Planning Act. Is not a part of the.
On the record?
Mr. Chief,
You had a question. If you want the answer, kindly let him answer. Thank you.
Chief, everyone here, including all staff, the public, and the process here of the Town of St. Andrews under the Planning and Advisory Committee has followed all the provisions under the Community Planning Act. There is no notice of reconciliation or any processes that are governed under the Community Planning Act for that. Noting such, everyone has been given an opportunity and an equal basis to participate in this. If you have any further comment or follow-up, we're happy to hear it in writing afterwards. However, PAC has made their decision. PAC had a question period. They also questioned and provided questions to your applicants, as well as the planner. If there was information that PAC needed to make their decision, they asked you during this time. There was no additional comment that was provided through anybody other than allowing PAC to gather their information tonight, beyond the comments that were made at the original meeting. And PAC has evaluated that information, has come to a decision. They have made their decision and have gone through the question period for any additional to which your staff asked questions and received answers from the planner. If there were any other questions that were pertaining to that, that was the time to do so. At the time, the chair answered the questions, moved to the PAC questions and comment period. No further comments were brought forward. So at this time, it is the chair's decision if she wishes to adjourn the meeting. I am playing it here as the full rules that are in the operations and rules and procedures.
So this is recorded, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll want a copy of that recording.
The copy of the recording will be posted on the YouTube channel of the Town of St. Andrews as of tomorrow. So it is available and free to anybody and any person that wishes to. I will note, again.
I have a question.
Yes.
Council have access to all that information that Mr. Henderson put forward this evening? Because according to her notes, it appeared that she had all the information prior to this meeting, which was unfair.
Your chair, Madam
Yes,
Chair, I will note, this is a PAC process. Councillor Harland sits on PAC as a member of council, but when she is here, her hat is off of council and representative of who is here.
And she was quite prepared with her comments,
Yes,
so.
but Madam Chair,
Yes,
it's your call if you wish to continue, but you are at adjournment.
yes, I was at adjournment 5 minutes ago, so here we are, 8:44. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.